Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody again to the second day of the ACRO annual conference. Feel free to walk around during the day. We have people with obviously displays, people selling books. So just make yourself at home, feel comfortable. We have three wonderful speakers today. First off is Bill Flowers. Then we have Rex Gilroy. And then we have Gary Oaker. But first I'd like to introduce Bill Flowers. Bill is a Tasmanian local. He is an animal artist specialising in Australian wildlife. He's also a snake handler. Bill is the co-host of a series on the Animal Planet called The Hunt for the Tasmanian Tiger. He's also an ex-zookeeper. He's worked at Devil's a Cradle, which a lot of people will probably recognise as similar to Devil Ark up in the Barrington. He's worked at the Tawana Wildlife Sanctuary, and he has had 10 years or more experience working with carnivorous marsupials. The Bill's talk today is on the thylacine, possibility of still being alive. Will you welcome Bill, please?
Okay, good morning. Does that sound right? Yep. Got it the right distance, that's always a bonus. Right, what I normally do, because I'm usually talking to a fairly hostile crowd, it might be the other way around this time. What I've done in the past is I've often done what we've called scatometer, where I've made a list of from 0 to 10, do you believe in thylacine being out there or not? But I usually set down some ground rules, because as Richard Dawkins once said, you can't prove there's not unicorns or fairies. So you can't be 100% sure they're not there. You can just say it's extremely unlikely. So it's from extremely unlikely, and now I would sort of say, well, you can't say there's a thylacine out there, because unless you've seen one in your backyard this morning, you don't really know, because they could have become extinct last week. So somewhere between likely or unlikely, or in the middle. Let's go 3 today. Who thinks that it's fairly likely the thalacine's still alive today? Okay, this is more than I'm used to. Who thinks it's very unlikely that they're around today? Good, go. He's going to get tarred and feathered later. Who's on the fence? Who's in the middle? Yeah, right. Good old agnostics. So you go. Usually you have your true believers, you have your agnostics, and you have your atheists. I am probably in the middle, leaning towards your side. That they're probably not here. But the interesting question is, if people believe that they're extinct, and a lot of people do, the question to ask them then is, when did they become extinct? Because I find that's a very interesting question. Anyway. Proof of thylacine. Let's start off with the basics. They're in zoos. That's good proof that thylacines did exist back in the 30s. There's no denying that it is a real animal. They existed in zoos. Next proof. They're shot in the wild. A recent death of a thylacine is proof that there are thylacines out there. I was talking to the guy in the Queen Victoria Museum, and that's basically what he would accept as proof of thylacine. Nothing less. Give him the body of a live animal, is all he would take as proof that thylacines still exist. That's healthy scepticism. Not for the thylacine. Here we have a date. Ask people, when did the thylacine become extinct? They say 7th of September 1936. We've just gone past the anniversary of it. When the government put that date on it, they sort of thought, you know, the last one had just died in the zoo that they had in captivity. They thought, well, what's going on here? Well, let's just say it's extinct and see who's going to complain, and let's get the sightings and let's do the investigation that way. So it was a very devious thing, actually announcing that they'd become extinct. I think even the most hardcore skeptic would say that's not the extinction date. And it's pure arrogance on the part of humans to think that we can put a date on when something becomes extinct. Because if the Thylacine's extinct, it probably died out in the forest somewhere and nobody saw the last one go. So let's talk about the credibility of stories. Some stories we find very credible and some stories we don't. And with thylacine, time is often what makes the difference. So let's just have a quick look at a newspaper article. Trove is a great website. If anybody is doing any sort of research, go into Trove and type in a few keywords. It's very hard when you're looking for thylacine, because you have to type in marsupial wolf, marsupial hyena, tiger spelled with a Y, there's all sorts of things. But when you do get there, you get some interesting stories. This is one of my little illustrations of what happened in 1911, where a thylacine, so it's on the way to the Melbourne Museum. I think it's probably a misprint, it's probably the zoo, because they were attempting to breed at the time. And it escaped in the parcel shed in the railway station. And a policeman had to come along. Policeman always a good, credible witness. And in 1911, this is all a fairly credible story, isn't it? The reason it's a credible story is because it's 1911. So let's have a look at this next possible credible story. Two guys go fishing in the Forth River, that's up on the northern part of Tasmania between Devonport and Alveston. They hear this crashing through the forest. Between them, a thylacine jumps out, splashes into the water, swims to the other side. They're looking at each other, what's going on here? It sees them, jumps back in the water and starts going towards them, snarling. They pull in their rods and they run away. In 1911. And most people wouldn't doubt that. But we've just got a couple of witnesses there. It's not as credible as more recent stories. So when it comes to looking at thylacine and looking at witnesses, time is the enemy. Because anything after 1940, it's questionable. Anything recently, you're a nutbag. That's basically what people say, you're a loonbag. So, like I say, time is the enemy. The further we get away from that so-called extinction date, which probably wasn't an extinction date, the less credible these stories seem. However, more credible than that fishing story is I had a chat to this guy here, Hans Narding. This guy, his job was to identify fauna and flora in Tasmania. That's his job. That's a pretty credible witness. Got a little sketchbook there, I've got here. And I'm sort of probably making assumptions, I better sort of go back a bit. Hans Narding, he was working for Parks and Wildlife. He parked his Jeep out in a place sort of to the west, to the northwest of Tasmania, slept in the back, heard something during the night. He put a torch out the window. It was raining, the rain was running down his arm, because I always thought, I wonder if he was just asleep. But he was getting wet. He saw this thylacine, counted the stripes, described it, described the smell, described everything. So I thought what I'd do is try my hand at being a police sketch artist. So this is the description of the thylacine that he claimed he saw that night. So I sort of sketched it in very, very lightly. Then he said, no, the back legs need to be longer, the tail needs to be shorter, one end was higher than the other. And so I changed and adapted the sketch as he directed me. And so this is the sketch of the animal that he saw that night. He even counted the stripes, 12 stripes. He said that it stayed sideways like that for a while, then it turned and looked at him and had a yellow reflection in the eye, which a lot of thylacine hunters in the past have said that. He estimated the weight. He said there was a strong smell that smelt like hyenas, because Hans, before he came to Tasmania, worked with hyenas. He worked in Africa, studying animals there. Here we have a witness who saw all this in 1981. The two fishermen were in 1911. Most people believe the fishermen. They have a big question about this guy. Speaking to him, I was sort of like, I came in very sceptical, and I talked to him, and I sort of thought, yeah, he seems to know what he's talking about, and he seems a fairly straight up guy. The other thing I found interesting is, dare I say, where he got it wrong. This seems way too long for a thylacine, and the tail probably seems a bit short unless it got nibbled off. So what this tells me is that he's not refreshing his memory constantly with photographs to retell the story, rather he was retelling the story as he remembered it. So this is where our research has led us to the 1980s. Now I am pretty sure thylacines were around in the 1980s in Tasmania. Okay, next we come across this guy who's a very interesting guy. This is Rusty. He's a snake man, so you can trust him. And he was this...
Look what he's got over his arm.
What's that?
I just saw what he's got over his arm.
Yeah, it's a tiger snake. Okay, Rusty, his job in Vietnam was a tracker, to go ahead of the platoon and track. He had an interest in paw prints, footprints, all sorts of things, because that's his job, being a tracker. When he came back from Vietnam and he found that society was pretty hostile to him and he just had enough of humanity, he went out and lived in Adamsfield, which is this place here. One of the things we're always looking for, we call it the 3 H's. We're looking for human interaction with a thylacine recently, we're looking for habitat, and we're looking for historical accounts. This is, I suppose it's about 20 kilometres away from where the last thylacine was caught and put in a zoo in the 30s. Historically, this has a strong historical significance as far as thylacines go. Habitat-wise, and this is where my interest in carnivorous marsupials come into play, it is brilliant predator habitat. You can go in the deepest forest, it's not the greatest of habitats, but you go in an open plain, you've got herbivores coming out and grazing on that grass. Around the rim of that, as it gets dark, you've got Tasmanian devils waiting to make a kill, because animals just walk. You know, if you've ever seen kangaroos walk, wallabies just walk down a path, devils are there waiting, and they just jump out and crack a skull. We've got any thylacines would probably do something similar, leap out with their big fangs, big mouth, and just grab something by the head or neck. So, perfect habitat. He lived out there by himself for years. This is a little hut that he lived in, and he was panning for gold out there. The other great thing about Rusty, he's a little bit of an environmental warrior. he'd have a gun and he would shoot feral cats. And the feral cat population dropped dramatically in that area because he would track and shoot them, which is not an easy thing to track a cat. Now, one of the stories he told us was that he found a dead thylacine in the 90s, and it was in a den. He described the den. We found the den, and that's what the den looks like. After 20 years or so, we couldn't find any evidence at all. We found a few droppings, but they were devil droppings. There was no thylacine droppings, there was no dead body, nothing existed. Police artist sketch time again, talking to Rusty, is basically what he saw. He also said that he heard, what alerted him to it is he heard a thylacine calling. So he went up to where he could hear the yipping of a thylacine and then found a dead one. So he thought there must have been a partner around making a noise or a commotion. So, very interesting story, not a scrap of evidence to back it up. So right now I think I'll start talking about what I would accept for evidence. I don't need a dead thylacine or a live one caught. I just need to see something that's going to make me believe. I went into the Tasmanian Museum. This is where I sketched those feet from. And I was allowed to go into the thylacine vault. This is like the holy of holies for a thylacine researcher. They have this temperature-controlled vault with all the bits and pieces of thylacine. In there they had quite a few, just the feet of thylacine. And so out of 3 or 4 of these feet, some were dry and a bit distorted, some were perfect. Out of them, I sort of worked out that this is basically what a thylacine paw print looks like. Because when you look in Barbara Triggs's book on scats and paw prints, it looks a bit more like modern art. So I needed a better understanding of what a thylacine paw print looks like. So the lovely lady at the museum was actually holding the paw prints while I was sketching them, and this is what they look like. You see there's a tiny little front claw there. And what you've got here, these 4 digits here, plant firmly down on the ground. The 5th one is up like a thumb, and sometimes just a little claw will go in. Other times, if the mud's thick enough, you'll get all 5 digits in. So this is crucial knowledge that I needed for the next exciting bit. Back at Rusty's, back at his hut, Chris found, and this is sort of one of these things, you know, do these guys actually planting this stuff for us to find or not? Chris had found, he walked into a door, and way up top, just on a bit of a beam somewhere, this plaster cast, because Rusty had been doing lots and lots of plaster casts, and a lot of them he had destroyed because they were really good plaster casts, but he destroyed them because he just didn't want people going out there. You've got to understand, Rusty doesn't want attention. He doesn't want people there. He just wants the world to leave him alone. The only way we even get Rusty to talk to us is the fact that Warren, the tall guy there, is a major in the army and somehow built up a rapport with him because of the Australian Army. I also built up a bit of rapport with him too because we're both snake men. Anyway, Chris, he finds this and he goes, look what I found, you know. And it wasn't planted there, it's dusty, you know. I went to art school. We used to cast plaster. And I'm sort of looking at, this is not from the 1920s or anything like that. This is more recent. This is in the last 30 or so years. And Rusty goes, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, I cast that back in the 80s, he thinks, you know. So we're looking at something from the 1980s. So it's very hard to get a photograph of it. So I've done a bit of a sketch at the side there to sort of show what it is. We've got a bit of leaf mulch over it, which again is really interesting because it's not a perfect cast. What we have got are the ridges here, match perfectly. The other thing is you'll notice with the thylacine how the toes sort of point a little bit inwards like that. So I think it's the paw print of a juvenile Tasmanian devil. And this also matches up around about the same time as Hans Narding report. So from his report, which I think is credible, the Tasmanian government believed it was credible. They launched a whole research thing from Hans Narding report. This, I like this because there's more hard evidence that we can actually look at. And we've found so many prints, but none of them as good as this, because you can actually see the dermal ridges in there.
Can you just clarify, sorry?
Yeah,
Sure,
you
yeah.
said, you said
Did you
devil.
say devil? You think it's a devil?
No, no, it's a
Or-
thylacine.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did
Sorry.
say
Did I say
devil.
devil? Did I?
Yeah.
So used to talking about devils, I talked
Thank
about
you.
devils for 10
Yeah,
years.
I was going to, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just pull me up when I say that.
That's all right. It's a
Yeah,
critical
young
thing.
thylacine.
Yeah, thank you.
More recently, in 2016, we had another report. Somebody was driving down the west coast in a place near what called Hatfield, and they saw a thylacine crossing the road. It was interesting that they told us the time, they told us the speed that they were doing, how long they saw it for. And so we thought, this sounds like a good place to go to do an investigation. We both just happened, well, all three of us just happened to be in the state at the same time, because we all have regular jobs, and so sometimes it's hard for us all to get together at the same time. We all just happened to be there. We wanted to do a research, and this report came up. That sounded pretty good, so let's go and investigate. So this is the area. Both sides of this road, you've got nothing but wilderness really. On the right here is the broken down remains of what used to be a little mining town. In Tasmania, you've got a lot of places that used to be towns, which are now just wilderness, and this is one of those type of places. The good thing about that is usually there's open areas, sort of like Adamsfield, where predators can hunt for prey. So that's me walking down there. What Chris and Warren got me to do was to stand on the side of the road like a Sasquatch while they go for a big long drive somewhere in their nice warm car with the heaters on. I'm out there left alone. They wanted to go down a few kilometres down the road. After a while I couldn't see them, I thought they'd left me there. I was to stand at the side of the road. They were going to drive past at the same speed to see if what clarity they could get visualising something as they drove by. So that's the way we work. We'll try and recreate the best we can a sighting. So they left me there, and I noticed everything's gone really quiet. The forest has just gone really, really quiet. Well, is that just me? Then I hear this, yip, yip. I was, what's that, you know? And I heard another response, yip, yip, yip. And I think, oh goodness, you know. And I sort of thought, this is what all the hunters are saying. They're hearing this yipping noise. What is it, you know? Straight away, a sceptical mind, what could it be? I hand raised just about every marsupial in Tasmania. The closest I could say was sugar glider, because sugar gliders do make that yipping noise. This sounded much bigger and further away than a sugar glider. So yeah, I still am not 100% sure what I heard, but my theory is, if anybody knows mole crickets, do you have mole crickets up here? Yeah. They dig a funnel and they make a noise and it echoes the noise really, really loud. Sugar gliders get into big hollow trees. So if they're going yip, yip, yip in a hollow tree and it's reverberating, it is quite possible that that is throwing out the noise. It wasn't a fox, it wasn't a devil, it wasn't a dog. It was either a thylacine or a sugar glider being echoed somehow, but two of them echoed in trees, they're found hollow trees. So when it comes down to it, you guys sort of think, well, what's the most probable? Seeing that our research has sort of like dead-ended somewhere in the 1980s as far as hard evidence go, then what happens is we got to sort of think, well, what's probable? You know, we see marks in the ground. Is it a dog? Is it a thylacine? What's the most probable thing that it is? You know, because one of the things we don't do is our default setting's not thylacine. You know, you don't go into these things with a default setting. If you're looking for a certain animal, you haven't got a default setting to that animal. You're looking for things that might be it, but then when you hear or see something, you've got to get there and think, well, is it this? What's the probability of it? You know. Give you a good example. Here's one we came across very early. Found this in the snow. Threw down some keys next to it. It was next to a track like this. It was just one paw print out in the snow. Thylacines have been known to stand on their back legs, according to reports. Tasmanian devils do that all the time. They stand up on their back legs. When you look at devil and thylacine skulls, they both have these big nasal cavities. So they stand up on their back legs, they put their nose in the air, wet nose, to pick up scent particles. So it's getting an advantage point to smell something, probably more so than to hear or to see something. And so it looked very much like it. What we've got here, going across there, I'm pretty sure, is eastern quoll. So this is the big paw print. Or it's just marks in the snow. That's the problem. This is not hard, for us, it's not hard evidence. It's suspicious. And again, time is the enemy. If this was 1918 instead of 2018, I'd sort of say, that's probably a thylacine. Since it's not, I have to sort of say, well, it's just marks in the snow, isn't it? And that's where time, like I say, is the enemy of a lot of this sort of stuff. Now, one of the reasons that Chris Copeland and I got into this is because we worked with Tasmanian devils so much that we realised that if we went and did a research on thylacine, which we both loved the idea of it being there, and we're asked about it all the time when we're working at the, well, Chris still works at Devil's Cradle. He's still getting asked about thylacine all the time. Everybody asks about thylacine. We sort of thought we could do a pretty good job of a research because there's a lot of days we would not waste on scats. You know, as a zookeeper, what your job is to pick up crap. For 10 years, I picked up crap. So you start every day picking up crap. You think that's a bad job. It's not actually a bad job. It's actually a really interesting job. It turns you into a master tracker because you get so used to seeing the paw prints and the crap in each of your enclosures. And even when I was a senior zookeeper for a while, I had people under me who would do that for me. I'd say, I want to clean up that enclosure, or I want to clean up that enclosure, because I wanted to check on the health of the animals. So you become a bit of a poo expert. I'd seen people sort of say, there's a dropping this long is too big for a Tasmanian devil, it must be a thylacine. I've got news for you. That's a male Tasmanian devil who came in on the feed a little bit late. He was frightened of the she-devils, and all he got to eat was fur, which bounded up and made it really long. So not only could I identify it as a devil, I could even tell you a bit of characteristics about that Tasmanian devil. And Chris and I would go into the bush and we'd go, yeah, devil, wombat, devil, dog, devil, wombat, devil. One of the problems is that we don't have really good idea of what thylacine droppings look like. But we see spotted tail quoll and we see Tasmanian devil are in the same family group, and their droppings are very different. And the only other thing we've got is a visual reference from a photograph from the Washington Zoo, where there's visual photographs of them. We've got a rough idea that they're going to look a bit like Tasmanian devil. The devil does have a distinct look, a distinct smell that you're very used to. Recently, I won't mention names of other researchers, but recently, last year, some people probably know who I'm talking about, somebody said, yes, we've got evidence of thylacine, we've got footage of it. And I was, yes, I was all excited. Great, you know. Finally saw the footage and I thought, spotted tail quoll. Misidentification happens quite often. The other name for spotted tail quoll is tiger cat or tiger quoll. The head of the spotted tail quoll, and I've hand raised these guys. This is a problem with working in a zoo, working with carnivorous marsupials. If you hand raise them, I've had devils and quolls in my lounge room. You've lived with these guys, they're part of your family, you identify them almost instantly. So one was, you know, here's a thylacine sniffing the camera. It's like if you guys have got like a pet dog or a pet cat and you recognise it sniffing the camera, you think, well, no, that's not a thylacine, that's my pet. So that's what it was like with it. It's a spotted tail quoll. I don't care if another group finds thylacine. I'm over the moon. I don't care. It's not about that. It's about the excitement of actually finding a thylacine would be great. So I was very disappointed to find that. One of the things that I find, and again, just remember I'm used to talking to a much more hostile crowd than this. One of the things I find is that a lot of people who don't believe that there's thylacines there now have sat on their backside in front of a computer screen and looked at Google Earth. And I have news for you that Google Earth never goes to 1:1 scale. It's always a little bit smaller. It's the size of your screen or these days your phone. And when you go to these places, you think, gee, Tasmania's big. It's vast. I won't say there's places people haven't been, because people have been almost everywhere through Tasmania, but there are places where people will go and do a soil sample for a mining company once every 10 years or 20 years. They're not looking for thylacine. You know, they could be walking over thylacine prints and thinking, gee, the dogs are big out here, or that big devil. Yeah. So a lot of people who go out are not zoologists, they're usually geologists, taking a soil sample and then getting out of there as quick as they can, saying whether it's worth mining or not. So it's one of the things that, if you was to ask me, do thylacines exist? And like, you know, I've actually worked the last week and I've just come to Sydney, I'd sort of say, look, it's pretty doubtful. You get me on a good night where I've sort of spent about 3 or 4 weeks out in my home state of Tassie, probably more out in the bush a bit, and I look around and I think, yeah, it's very possible. Knowing how well animals can hide, and something that doesn't want to be found, in Tasmania, it wouldn't be found. So, conclusion, I just have to say maybe. Okay, I'm sitting on the fence. I have got no evidence. I tend to think that there were thylacines in the 1980s, and that is something. When I started this search, I thought, no, they probably died out in the 40s or 50s. The more I researched into it, 60s seemed more viable. When you look at people like Eric Geiler, which I have a lot of respect for. He believed they were there up until, the 70s or so. Then it starts getting doubtful. I think, 80s is quite a reasonable stand to take if you're a skeptic. Okay, so that's a big admission. But the 80s is a fairly reasonable thing to take on if you're a skeptic. Although we haven't shot a thylacine or captured one in that time, I think there's enough evidence for that. And I think my time's just about up. No? Do you want to take a couple of questions, or do we leave that till later? Or?
Anybody got any questions for
Yeah.
Bill? Mainly thylacine.
Look, this is my uneducated point of view. When I say uneducated, I say, look, there's probably not a Loch Ness monster. I say that as uneducated because I've never been to Loch Ness. Okay, I have not done a serious study into thylacine in the mainland. I suspect that they probably died out in the 1800s. I base that upon Paddle's book, and in Paddle's book he talks about, and he doesn't commit either way, he just puts it out there and you draw your own conclusion. Paddle talks about one being shot in the Blue Mountains and a zoologist coming along and seeing that skin and saying, yeah, that's thylacine. There's also the case that in South Australia they put a bounty on thylacine around about the same time as they did with Tasmania. Now the problem with the mainland, I mean obviously there were here, there's Aboriginal carvings, there's bones, there's stacks of evidence that there were here, but as recently as the 1800s, there was nobody claimed on the bounty, and we don't have any specimens in museums, so that's sort of what throws doubt upon it. But I think there's probably enough circumstantial evidence. For me personally, I would sort of say, in the 1800s. I've not seen anything apart from pictures of mangy foxes to prove otherwise.
Mangy foxes.
Have you seen a photograph of a fox with mange?
Yep.
Yeah. And I have to also say, and we're probably also talking about a famous one in South Australia just recently, and everybody's criticising that for how blurry the camera was. People have got no idea how hard it is to take a picture of an animal from a distance. It's very hard. In real life, they move around, and it's hard to focus. And by the time you do focus, I was trying to take some eastern rosellas. I was trying to take a photograph of them today, and I couldn't. How common are they? With good cameras, so there's a lot of photos which are blurry and that's one of the things. The critics look at blurry photo, but
the reason I asked is, like I'm in the SDS and Real Fire Brigade, and I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, we saw this funny-looking dog," and all that sort of thing when you go out and do jobs and stuff like that out in the bush. So, some of the things I've heard are pretty close to that type of thing, especially pups.
Yeah. One of the problems with canines is that we have bred them and mutated them so much. They come in so many different forms, from Great Danes down to Chihuahuas. We've got, Josh has seen old dogs, I think that's weird. I think bulldogs, why would anyone want one? So that's one of the big problems we've had with our research too, is to get a paw print, which is not canine. And when you go and you look at canine, you realise you go along a dog beach and how many variations there are. And we found some that look like thylacine that are this big, and they're just from a little dog. So unless I can clearly see how the toes are arranged, how they point in a little bit, how they've got those ridges there, if I see all that, it's like, bingo.
Is there any stories of the aggression towards domestic dogs? Because the one in particular I got told about was little pups turned on a couple of blue heelers and gave them a real toweling up, but they were only little pups that were stirring these dogs up.
There's heaps of reports with devil and thylacine about, usually the one is that dogs are terrified. The dogs are terrified, you know, big brave dogs are terrified because it's not something they do really, you know. I've heard that story a lot. I know that if push comes to shove, dog will probably win a fight, unfortunately, because it happens to devils all the time. Dogs are a pest because they kill devils. I've gone off track with. Oh yeah. No, I'm sorry, I've lost the track.
No, it was just.
Oh yeah, the fear of them. Yeah. Yeah, I hear it again. Again, it's not substantiated. And how do you do that? Do you get a thylacine behind a screen and bring dogs up and see which ones are afraid or not? It's very hard to do that. So you can only really go on what people say.
The story I was told is these blue heelers were scared of something and they were the size of pups.
Okay.
A blue heeler doesn't back down from much.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And whether it was dingo pups or whether it was, but the dingo pup won't never go a blue heeler.
Yeah, that's right.
So these two dogs were cowed up
Yeah.
near a chicken coop by 3 or 4 pups.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting. Yeah. So is it first hand or is it second hand report to you or third hand? Or?
No, it was I guess it was second hand. It was another guy that was in the SES. It was his property and we went out to do a job on his place.
Yeah.
And he had to get rid of these animals. I told Gary Oaker about it.
Yeah.
And we wanted to go back and get the bodies.
Oh,
of the
okay.
pups. And we thought they were a bit suspicious.
Oh, you didn't get them?
No,
No.
he got rid of them.
Yeah, it's just, isn't it?
Thinking that he was going to get into trouble from the Parks and Wildlife for killing something that he shouldn't have.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Yeah, okay. Yes.
I just wondering, I mean, there are a number of people involved in research and field work, and I know Cole Bailey has made it quite popular, but again, holding back information a bit like Rusty, not wanting people to go into the area in case they are there.
Yeah.
So what's your feeling about that, trying to preserve, keep them safe rather than finding if they're there?
I'm not saying. That's the hardest question we've got, is if we find hardcore evidence of thylacine, what do we do? What do we do? And we talk about it, we debate about it, do we let everyone know? Well, probably no, we're not going to give out the location, that's for sure. The only way we would give out the location is if the whole place was going to get, flattened for a mine or something like that. But a lot of the places we research and have, got reports of thylacine, it's around mining places, it's around things. And it's sort of like the status quo is there, so why bother it, because they're surviving with it the way it is. So it's a really hard question. I sort of asked Cole that, and Cole himself withheld a sighting.
For a long time.
He sort of said it's to, so his mate Eric Geiler wouldn't go out there because he was, feeling poorly. He held on to it, and it's a very interesting sighting, and it was very close to, not far from where Rusty was, and not far from where the last thylacine was caught. So you've got like the 3 H's right there. And it's really funny because, well, it's not funny, I suppose, it's probably insulting for poor Cole. Was, I used to think he was a nutter. But then I read his books and I thought, no, actually, he seems really good. So I've sort of gone the other way. I have a fair bit of respect for Cole now. So yeah, I find it a very hard question to answer. There's certain things we don't say. We've found straight away, we're out there for the animals, and suddenly we find ourselves in the middle of a political battlefield. There are places where, they just hate us because they're loggers or something like that, or they think that we're going to destroy their livelihood because they think that we're with an extreme Green Party who's going to lock up all the forests. And we're not, because if thylacine is existing there, well, somebody's doing something right. And then we get the other group, who are trying to push us into the green group to sort of say, let's lock up all this land. So we just, we're not interested. All we want to know is it there or not? Personally, on a personal note, if I saw one, I'd just be happy.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions?
I'd just like to say about the sugar gliders yipping. As far as I know, they never yip inside hollow branches or anything. I've heard them yipping for many years in many locations, and they always they call while they're actually feeding and foraging in the canopy.
Okay.
So I think it'd be highly unlikely one would ever call within any kind of a hollow log. I mean, that would be sort of attracting attention, and they're calling, but there must be, I suppose it's their contact calls and territorial calls, but yeah, I've watched them many, many times, and they only ever call while they're actually foraging, usually on an insect in the canopy.
Yeah, I can only go on my experience, and I hand raised a few of them, and they used to sometimes yip in the bag, and sometimes we had them in an enclosure about this big in a nocturnal house in the zoo, and they would yip from there occasionally. So I would probably say if the log was big enough, and there's some damn big trees in Tassie, that it could probably happen. It's that, or it's something else, you know, which is open question. Again, the default setting is not quite thylacine, but I'm pretty convinced it's whatever I heard is what the hunters are hearing. So I'm not 100% convinced that it's sugar glider. I'm certainly nowhere convinced that it's thylacine. I've just heard this noise made, a mammalian noise. It was, again, I've worked with owls. It wasn't a bird noise. It was a mammalian noise, large, well, it seemed like a large one.
And it should also be, if you can get nearer it, because the sound does travel a little distance, but
Yeah.
it's always called, they always call from the treetops. So that's what the yipping was coming from anywhere near the ground, but it's highly unlikely to be a sugar
I could not say if it was the treetops or not. I was on a road, the road was high, it was going up, to me it sounded like it's from a kilometre away. That's what it sounded like. But you know, again, I can't verify that. I have heard the same noise in recordings where people will say, it's thylacine, you hear this yip, yip in the background.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think I've heard that same, and but it's very difficult to say that.
It's hard to say what it is. Speaking of Rusty, he said that there's, like what I was hearing was like, yip, yip, you know, and speaking of Rusty, he would sort of say there's yip, yip, and there's yip, 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 and there was like that sort of call. So again, it wasn't quite what people have described thylacines before the hunters, you know, back in the early 20th century. But it is very close. It is pretty much what people are saying now. When they do get a little bit, you hear it in the background of recordings. You hear some, I think even our website, it's not on our website, I've kept it secret, but there's somewhere it goes, shh, shh, it's a thylacine yarn, in the background is, yep, yep. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard that. So, yeah.
And well, is Rusty able to elucidate on any other observations, like other calls or other behaviour or anything else? Did he think that there was, you know, a pair or one, or did he have any ideas at all about this presumed thylacine?
Most of the thylacines he's talking about is where he's just taken plaster casts and he's heard them. And then it was that one time where he heard a thylacine while he's panning for gold, so he decided to go and track it down. And that led him up to the den where he found the dead thylacine. So he assumed that the mate or hunting partner or whatever it is, we don't even really know the social structure of thylacines, was about. Because that's the other question is, you know, are they a pack hunter or are they solitary? I tend to think the social structure is probably like spotted-tailed quoll. And again, I've had this experience where people have said, we saw a group of thylacines running, and with spotted-tailed quoll, when the young are with mum, they get almost to the size mum is before they disperse, And when you're working in a zoo, you come out with a bit of meat, you just sort of see like a pack of spotted-tailed quolls running towards you. And I think thylacine, this is just my guessing with what I know, I think thylacine social structure is probably the same. They're probably solitary animals, but when mum's raising young, she's got a whole heap of them and they've come to about the same size as her. Before they disperse, they may look like a pack. Yes?
What was the result when they left you on the roadside and they came back? Did they find anything that...
No, we didn't find any evidence. So I was quickly get the camera out, quickly get the stuff out, you know, and because I was there by myself for a long time. And so of course we set up trail cameras in the area, which we plan to do anyway. We did bait one, but she's got ravens. So from that, nothing came of it. We've been back a few times. We left the cameras out there for about 3 months and mostly got possums. We didn't even get a devil. So unfortunately, and that's a usual story. It's a common story. And that's not saying, again, this is where it gets dangerous. It's like, oh, well, we researched and there's no thylacine. That doesn't mean there's no thylacine was there. It just means that we didn't find it. If the thylacine's running through there, it doesn't mean it's going to stay in the bush there. It's going to probably keep going. Again, so I'm used to talking to a hostile crowd here, going the other way. Look, I lived in a place for 20 years, and in that time, I caught hundreds and hundreds of snakes, but not on my property. I lived right next to a swamp and saw one copperhead in that time. Tiger snakes are an extremely common snake. I never saw one, and I lived there for 20 years, right next to a swamp. I wanted to go out and get called out for it all the time, but see, this is the thing of animals. Animals don't want to be fed. If I want to try and show somebody a platypus, it's like, yeah, well, I'm not sure, sometimes they're here, you know. If I'm not looking for one, oh, there's one. That's the nature of animals. They're not there sitting waiting for us to find them. They're just getting about their business. They don't care. And I think an animal as rare as a thylacine would be exceptionally hard to find. I think naively we went into this as sort of like Mythbusters, going to go just tear down every report and sort of say, yeah, that's rubbish. We did go in sceptical. We've come out sort of halfway between, I think, where we're probably still sceptical, but we are nowhere near as sceptical as we used to be. And we're nowhere near as arrogant, because we realise how do you do a proper search on thylacine? You'd have to employ about 300 or 400 people on the ground. You'd have to have enormous resources to actually find thylacine, because Tasmania is such a vast place. And so, you know, it might not happen in my lifetime. And the other possibility is, as I said, when do they become extinct? They could have become extinct last week. They might become extinct, you know, in a few minutes' time. They might become extinct, you know, next year. When is the extinction date of the thylacine? We don't really know. And probably never will. Hopefully they're not. Yes?
I'm just interested in your opinion on which I think is now defunct, the Thylacine cloning project. What is your moral kind of opinion on that? Do you think that's a good thing? Or? If they could do it, I mean. Yeah.
To start with, I'm not that sort of a scientist, so this is going to be all from a zookeeper point of view. Look, I heard that they have successfully got live DNA to a mouse, thylacine DNA in a mouse, they're successfully live in there. The problem I always had with it is not so much, you know, getting a little thylacine, which is going to be like about that big, is what do you do with something that big? You have to be able to make an artificial pouch. Now in the future, if they are able to somehow 3D print an artificial pouch which is going to give a good milk source to something like that, that's okay, I suppose, if we can get that happening. And yeah, it'd be great. Because as far as extinction goes, if they're extinct, it's only just happened. In fact, if they... let's just say we go the scientific route and say, okay, 2,000 years ago they become extinct on mainland Australia. That's still only just happened. When you're talking natural history terms, it only just happened. So my problem is, what do you do with a baby thylacine? Because it's not like other things born complete. It's just needs a pouch, needs something to hand raise it.
Couldn't you get another mammal to raise it?
Okay, yeah. I
Something
suppose.
similar size?
What is a similar size to?
Kangaroo?
No, you give the wrong type of milk. You see, the milk
Well,
the herbivore milk has not got enough protein in. With the Tasmanian devil, the milk that you feed a baby devil has got a lot more protein in it.
yeah.
Possum would be closer because at least it's an omnivore.
Yeah.
Kangaroos eat the occasional grasshopper, but most of the time they're just grazing on grass. Tasmanian devil's the one that's always put out there, and it's rough being a baby Tasmanian devil.
Oh,
And that's
Yeah.
probably related.
Somewhere between 20 and 60 are born, and only 4 make day one, and out of those 4, only 2 usually make it, and one of those usually get hit by a car.
And they're strongly related, aren't they, the thylacine and the...
Not strongly related. We're the same as us and a gibbon.
Oh, okay.
Okay, same order, but no,
Right.
not the same family.
Right.
Yeah, so, and this is the other problem. I can come to you and I can say, look, a devil does this, a spotted-tailed quail does this. I'm just guessing what a large mammal marsupial would do, but I don't really know. I'm certainly not an expert on thylacine.
But wouldn't they be able to keep a large omnivore or carnivorous mammal in an environment that's not going to involve getting hit by cars or... And,
Oh yeah, well,
you know, if
rule
you're
out
spending
getting hit
sort
by
of-
cars, they say it's...
Yeah,
When you get a baby marsupial that's so big, some people can keep it alive in a humidic crib.
Yep.
Okay? So you got a little wombat or a kangaroo and you think, oh, I'm going to really save this little thing. Put it in a humidic crib. You're feeding it an artificial milk,
Yeah.
okay, to try and simulate mum's milk.
Yep.
And yes, it's got a lot of good stuff in there. What we find is that those ones, if they do make it through, they're weak and sickly and usually die pretty soon after that. So, and I don't think anybody's got one that big. Usually it's, they're naked, before we call them, just nude ones, then we have the velvets, and then we have fully furred. Certainly once you get to velvet and fully furred, they're fairly easy to hand raise. I've hand raised dozens of them, But when you've got them without fur, it is such a struggle. Such a struggle. And I'm sure with a lot of resources and the right community crib, like I said, you have to make some sort of artificial pouch.
it's a pity you can't get a kangaroo to do it yourself always.
Bill, the question over here was the moral, and no, we don't have a problem with the moral because
No, I don't
humans
have a problem.
created the
'Cause like
problem
I
and
said,
shot
it's
them. So we should fix the problem, yeah.
Yeah.
We feel,
Think of how many millions of years we've been on the, that life has been on the planet. Thylacine dying out, it's just happened. So if we can de-extinct it, I think it'd be fine. I mean, it'd be fine. If we put that predator into the Australian wilderness, the Tasmanian wilderness, again, hopefully it would just resume its role as top predator. Again, how much was it an actual apex predator? The problem with Mainland is you probably have to get rid of dingoes first. And people are pretty keen to protect dingoes, which I should see as a feral dog, but anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just ask just a quick one on eyewitnesses? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you get a lot of eyewitnesses and a lot of them are very credible.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there are people who say they would never say anything until they felt that they're trusted and all of that. So there's some very credible eyewitness accounts.
There is, but on the other scale, there's a
Yeah,
lot
of
that's
course.
not. And this is my experience as a herpetologist. Get a phone call. There's this big black snake. It's 1 metre long. It's in my garden. It's snapping. It's attacking people, striking people. So I go and I pick up this thing this big. So yes, there was a snake there.
But it wasn't
It was true. Some of it but some of the details weren't true, and this is where we fall into trouble. The other thing is, and this is what I find, excuse me, really interesting is people see something and they have to relay that story, but it's had such an impact on them. How do they relay that impact back to the person? They exaggerate the details a little bit.
And what they want to believe sometimes too, what they wish it was.
Sometimes what they want to believe. Oh, there's a lot of people I talk to, I believe they believe. Okay? I certainly believe they believe. Even further, I believe they saw something. And there are a lot of things that could be misidentified. Yeah. Okay, must be.
Yep.
Must be great. You can hunt me down and ask me.
Thank you, Bill. If anybody has any other questions, what we're going to do after lunch is have a Q&A session with all the presenters. So if anybody has any questions, by all means, okay, until then. We'll have a short break now, and our next presenter will be the legendary Rex Gilroy.